All right, well, welcome folks. It's good to have you back again. Um, Obviously, a lot of reasons why you might be watching this video. Some of you may have been absent. Others may just want a review of the information. So let's just jump right into it. This lesson is over the early years of our country and how we decided to implement the Articles of Confederation, how that failed, and then what we did about it to create the Constitution that was the basis of what we have today. Excuse me, sorry about that. So if you didn't get the bell work, if you haven't done that, again, this is an expectation that if you missed today for whatever reason, that you're getting this bell work. The reason for the date is this is the first date that we will be going over this. Obviously, not all classes are on the same time schedule. So some classes will get it today, others won't get it until next week sometime, possibly. But regardless, I want to make sure that you have it and that that you're being responsible to do it. So here's the bell work. Question is, if you were given a vote in changing one rule about Newman Academy, what rule would it be and why? Would there be any negative results from the change? I just want you to think about that. Think through it. Think through policy and what policy do you like? What policy don't you like? What would you speak up against, and why that one? Is it just preference? Is it just your personal preference, or is there any fact behind it? Would there be any negative result? And not saying that that would be a bad thing, but what would be a negative result of that? And the reason is I just want to get you thinking. I want to get you thinking about changing policy, writing policy, because that's what we're talking about in history. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, go ahead and pause the video and take a few minutes to write that. Make sure you put your heading on it and push play when you're ready. Okay, well, hopefully you were able to do that and it went well. Always eager to hear the thoughts of the students, so so we'll see what happens. Make sure you bring that in and turn it in to me when you come back. Okay, so today we are really focusing on understanding the issues creating and approving the Constitution of the United States of America and the people involved. That's our objective today. That'll come in the form of the notes that we're going to take. We're going to do a Venn diagram, and we're going to review questions. Actually, this presentation isn't going to cover those questions. That's in another presentation. It's not something that we're doing a video over, but hopefully you can basically just go in the book and do those questions. It doesn't really need a video to explain that. Again, if you don't have the online book username and passcode or password, then you can come to me and I'll make sure you get that so that you can get online from home. Okay, just as always, reminders of pride. Be prepared, be respectful, have integrity, be dependable, and have etiquette, something that we're just continually working on every single day. You're in middle school now. You're expected to have a little bit more level of preparation and respect and integrity, just everything. Everything needs to ramp up a little bit. Definitely when you get into high school, there's even a higher expectation. Keep up with your planners and study and keep up with your assignments. Don't forget to do your work. You need to be responsible. Love mom and dad. They're great and they're a great help. Definitely someone that you can't be without. However, you're in middle school now and you bear a responsibility for your work. Mom and dad can't always help you. They can't always be there to remind you to bring, they can't hand walk your homework to class for you. That needs to be your responsibility. Again, being dependable, right? Being dependable. We want to be dependable. Okay. Just a quick overview of the TEKS that we're going to go over today. I don't want to spend a lot of time doing this. I want to get into the meat of it, but we are going to talk about the creation and ratification of the Constitution today. We're going to, again, talk about the writing of the Constitution, 1787. We are going to analyze the Constitutional Convention and the Great Compromise, Three-Fifths Compromise. We're going to analyze that. We're going to compare and contrast that today. Describe major domestic problems, definitely the problems facing the creation of the Constitution, something we're going to talk about. And 7B, we're going to look at political, economic, social factors of slavery and freeing those slaves. We're going to look at some of those political factors that hindered that with specifically the Three-Fifths Compromise today. 12B, we're going to look at the reasons for developing the plantation system, which we've already kind of done. We've looked at the transatlantic slave trade with a triangular trade. And we're going to touch a little bit on that spread of slavery, but basically just talking a lot about that slavery issue towards the end of this lesson. Not a lot, but definitely we're going to focus on that a little bit. 15B, we're going to look at some of the weaknesses, again, of the Articles of Confederation. Not something that that's going to last us for a long time. Okay, hopefully that made sense. And I'm not sure that we're actually going to get to the Three-Fifths Compromise. I may have misspoke there. We might get to that more in the next section. But no, that's right. Yeah, we're going to be able to get there. Okay. Sorry. It's early when I'm recording this. I'm actually doing it before school, so it's my brain doesn't always work. So forgive me for that. But we're going to press on as we do. Also, we're going to just summarize some of the historical context and events. We're going to work on summarizing some of these, especially through the exercises and activities. And we're going to describe the contributions of significant leaders in all of this. We've already talked about John Paul Jones, and we'll talk about more people as we move on. All right. Yes, so analyze contributions of people. A lot of takes, that's why I said we want to rush through these. Contributions of various people, as we talked about already, and we're going to identify points of view. So all things we're going to be covering in this lesson. So let's jump into it. This is Chapter 8, Lesson 2, Forging a New Nation. I like that word, forging. Let me tell you why. One of my hobbies, if you don't know Mr. Mendoza, let me tell you, one of my hobbies is forging or blacksmithing. I like to take a piece of metal, heat it up until it's glowing orange, right? Yellow and orange, and then take a hammer and beat it and just shape it into various shapes. I love doing that. That's called forging, okay? You put it into a forge and then you forge it. You manipulate and bend and mash that piece of metal. You squeeze it and lengthen it, and you just change the whole shape of that metal. But it takes a lot of heat, it takes a lot of force, it takes hammering that. Guys, that's what it was with our nation. That's what happened with our nation, is it took a lot of forging, a lot of heating up that metal and beating it, okay? It was not an easy experience. It was not a pleasant thing all the time. It took a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of sweat. So that is a great word to describe the beginning of our nation. So we talked about already, the Articles of Confederation, they were just too weak. They were so weak, couldn't fix our nation's problems. They just couldn't. If you can't tax, you're not going to be able to pay anybody. And if you're reliant on borrowing, it's kind of like, if you spend your whole life saying, well, I don't need a job, I'm just going to borrow from my parents. Guys, that's not going to last very long, okay? That is not going to last very long at all. And your parents might say no, and then what are you going to do? You're going to go to your landlord and say, I'm sorry, I can't pay the rent today because my mom didn't let me borrow money. Well, they're not going to be too happy about that. So being able to tax and to have a regular source of income for the country is vital. And we did talk about that last time. The Revolutionary War, after that, what you saw is the country's in debt. They don't have money coming in. And so they go through something that's called a depression, okay, a depression. And that's just like it says here, a period when economic activity slows and unemployment increases. So more people are out of jobs. You saw that people didn't have money because of it. And so here's the cycle of a depression. This is why it's hard to get us out of it, but eventually we do. Unemployment, when people start losing their jobs, because and we're going to walk through it, but when people start losing their jobs, they can't pay their bills, they don't go to restaurants, they don't buy new things because they don't have money. They start to tighten up that belt. And when they start tightening up that pocketbook and they don't spend money, well, then the people that rely on that money, then they start to have economic issues and then they lose their job. And it's just this huge ripple effect. People go on and they need to, at some point, get some employment, get some jobs, get some money back into that situation. And there's various ways that in our history we've tried to do that. Some of them good, some of them not good. But the point is, at some point, people need to get back to work and start getting money circulating, out there. I need to get money and go and to the grocery store and buy groceries, and then the people that I pay, they need to be able to take that money that they make and then go and buy more things, and then they can, and it just ripples in a good direction. So depressions are not good. We won't get in this class to the Great Depression of the early 1900s, but we will talk about various depressions in here between now and then. All right, so basically what's happening, and we're moving on into something called Shays' Rebellion. See, this economic crisis, this depression, some of the worst hit people were farmers because farmers didn't get paid. We have all this issue with trading, and if they can't trade their crops, well, then they are not getting paid. And so it all, again, equals to economic crisis. Now, if the farmers don't have money, well, they can't pay their taxes. I don't have money. I can't pay my taxes. I don't have any money. And if they can't pay their taxes, then they get thrown into jail. That's the law. So the economic crisis leads to people, particularly farmers, getting thrown into jail. One of the farmers was quoted and he said, "Surely your honors are not strangers to the distress and the problems of the people, but know that many of our good inhabitants, we're good people, are now confined in jail for debt and taxes." It's like, guys, it's not our fault. We're not being lazy. We're not criminals. We just don't have any money because of what's going on. We got to do something about this. And so that was from the petition from the town of Greenwich, Massachusetts. Greenwich, Massachusetts. All right, so this is a video, and I don't know that this is necessarily going to play on here. I'll click the button, and this is kind of an experiment for all of us. So let's see what happens here. Nope, nothing. That's what happens here. Oh, there it plays. Okay, good.
All around him, Daniel Shays saw poor farmers like himself, many of whom he had served with in the Revolutionary War, now being sent to rot in debtors' prisons. Families were left without providers, and mothers were forced to beg in the streets.
He had been taken to court for debts twice by different retailers. So Daniel Shays was afraid that he was going to lose his land, he was going to lose his crops, lose his cows, and so on, and he couldn't support his family at that point.
To lose your farm and to have to work for someone else was more than just an economic decline. It was a decline in your status in your country. That is, you would no longer be a voter. In order to vote in most colonies and in most states, you had to prove that you owned land. This made you an independent man.
And here you have an interesting situation of the complete insensitivity, the blindness of a political elite. The political elite that governed Massachusetts were for the most part centered in eastern Massachusetts. They were oriented towards the sea, towards commerce, towards business. And indeed, there was a wide cultural, economic, and geographic gap between eastern Massachusetts and the western part of the colony.
Shays began to meet frequently with his supporters at Conkey's Tavern, inciting them with talk of self-government and rebellion.
It had been a tradition for decades and decades, maybe centuries, to have demonstrations by the people when they felt that there was some economic inequity or some invasion of people's rights as citizens by people in power. Shays' Rebellion, in a sense, comes out of that tradition.
Shays had convinced his fellow farmers that something had to change. During the summer of 1786, all over western Massachusetts, conventions were held to determine a list of demands that were to be delivered to state government leaders in Boston. Because Boston was both the center of industry and also the major port, the state government was largely composed of wealthy lawyers, merchants, and property owners.
The Eastern establishment turned a deaf ear. There were protests. The rebellion that erupts in 1786 and 87 did not come as a great surprise. There had been lots of little bits of evidence and suggestions that the people in the West were unhappy. But the Eastern establishment ignored that. And they went ahead with their program of taxation. That is, taxation to raise the money, to pay the state debt, and to make the necessary contributions to national government. In the meantime, ignoring this rising chorus that was coming up from the more rural areas of Massachusetts.
As a prominent figure in the Eastern establishment, Samuel Adams had vowed to stay out of politics after the Revolution. But the temptation was too much, and he eventually ran for state senate. He won, and was soon elected Senate President. One of his first acts was to call for an end to the county conventions.
County conventions are not only useless, but dangerous. They served an excellent purpose and were highly necessary when they were set up. But no more!
The irony of Samuel Adams's career after the American Revolution is that the very techniques that he pioneered, the very strategies that he developed, the very tactics that he employed were now going to be used by, one might almost say, his students. His students being now the farmers in western and central Massachusetts. They began to organize in meetings of protest, in county conventions, in town meetings, in all kinds of activities that mirrored exactly what Samuel Adams had been doing in the 1770s. The difference now is that Samuel Adams, the great agitator of the 1770s, the great organizer of resistance, now in the 1780s, looks upon these people in resistance and is horrified, absolutely horrified.
It can never be the duty of one man to be concerned in more than one revolution.
But Daniel Shays and the farmers of western Massachusetts didn't agree. They were indeed concerning themselves with a second rebellion. They had tried the way of conventions, petitions, and letters to their elected leaders. They had tried to seek justice legally, and they had been ignored.
They viewed lawyers and they viewed judges in the same way as they viewed the Eastern politicians. These were men out to suck their blood.
Shays still had no way to pay his debts to the businessmen of eastern Massachusetts, and was faced with the threat of imprisonment, crushing poverty, and the loss of his farm. To feed his family, he had been forced to sell his most cherished belonging, the sword he had received from the Marquis de Lafayette. Fortunately, Daniel Shays still had one sword left, the cutlass he had carried in the Battle of Bunker Hill. And now he sharpened it again in preparation for a new battle. In the late fall of 1786, Daniel Shays began to muster and train an army. Among them were many of the men he had fought with in the Revolution.
The Massachusetts veterans of the Revolution who joined Shays' Rebellion put the hemlock in their hat when they went off to war to fight against British tyranny. I mean, it was symbolic. This is the new tyranny that they're fighting against.
The poor and oppressed of Massachusetts had desperately needed a leader. Now they had one, Daniel Shays.
All right, so that hopefully gives you a good idea of the background of Shays' Rebellion and kind of what the heart of it was. Just pointing out, remember we talked about the Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams, the committees of correspondence, Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams, this guy who's always stirring up trouble, always protesting in the streets. And here this same guy now is saying, man, what is wrong with these people? Why are they all getting upset? It's all nice and good for you to say we have a voice, but you have to understand other people have a voice too. Just because you don't agree with them doesn't mean they don't have a voice, right? And we're seeing the same thing happening today. The same kind of things that they were talking about. We have this tradition of, if you remember that lady, she was saying, we in this country have a tradition of protesting when we feel there's some kind of an injustice or violation of rights. Well, that's what we're having even this week, last week. We're still having the same thing. We're having protests because people feel like their rights are being violated. I mean, that hasn't changed. I would argue that's not even American. That's just people have done that. But definitely in America, that's a hallmark of what we do, right? We have the right to protest. We have the right to speak our mind. That's kind of a cool thing. I think it's a cool thing. Anyway, if you had any trouble watching that video, in the notes I do provide the link. So for whatever reason the sound didn't work out or there was a glitch or whatever happens, just remember that I do have that link in the notes. Okay. So 1786, these angry farmers led by Continental Army Captain Daniel Shays forced these courts of the western part of the state to close. And January 1787, Shays led his troops, about 1,200 people. That's not a small group. That's a pretty good group. I mean, always kind of put it in relation to your church. Most churches don't have 1,200 people in the whole congregation. That's a lot of people, So, but anyways, led those supporters towards the federal arsenal. An arsenal is where they keep weapons in Springfield, Massachusetts. They had one, so that's where they led them. And so it's just really causing a lot of problems. Well, they brought in the state militia. The state militia actually fired over their heads initially, but it did not stop the rebellion. So they started firing again, ended up killing 4 men. And that's where it ends. And you see there a picture of the last battle of Shays' Rebellion was here. There's a little tombstone to commemorate that. February 27th, 1787. February 27th, 1787. There's a lot of sevens in there, so you get a little tongue-tied. Okay, Constitutional Convention. Some leaders they wanted independent state governments. They said, we want the government of each state to kind of be isolated, and we don't want a big, central government over everybody. And other people were like, no, this Articles of Confederation thing is messed up. We have to have a strong central government. Otherwise, there's no point to it. Either way, it meant changing the Articles of Confederation. So if you wanted more independent state government, you're going to have to change it. If you want a stronger central government, you're going to have to change it. So either way, there's like, what, let's just change this thing. And 2 main reformers were brought in and ended up being very instrumental, and that is James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. You see their pictures here. Obviously, Hamilton, a very big thing, these days because of the play. I would argue this. The play is great. The musical, rather, is great. I've not seen the whole thing. I've seen little snippets of it. Other than the language that is used, I don't have a huge problem with it. A lot of historical facts. But here's my thing. If you don't know the history, if you haven't read a book, if you don't know what really happened and you don't know what we've been learning in class, you can go there and spend whatever time, 2 hours there watching that thing, and 90% of the good history that's in there, you will miss, right? Because even the one song I talked about, it had a fleeting mention of Rochambeau. Well, okay, they mentioned Rochambeau, but who is Rochambeau? Well, we talked about him in the last section. We talked about how he was a guy that led the French forces in this, and when the French sent their fleet and helped to corner the British people in Yorktown, and so he was one of the commanders, Comte de Rochambeau. Well, you don't know that. You just hear a random thing and you probably didn't even know what he said. You probably thought he said something else. Well, that's why. You got to know the history, and it makes it so much better when you go to one of those things. If you go, you can enjoy it so much more because now you know what they talked about, and most other people don't. Again, I don't care for the language. I'm definitely not endorsing Alexander or Hamilton, the musical Hamilton, because of that fact. I mean, I'm not going to tell you to go there and listen to people people cuss and they're singing, but if that's your thing, hey, I'm not throwing stones. Hey, whatever. It's just personal choice. Anyway, moving on. I don't know why we talked about that. And I'm sure it's a great musical and it's highly acclaimed. So anyway, okay, 1786. Alexander Hamilton called for a convention. We talked about him already in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, as we talked about in the last section, Philadelphia is, more than any other city, it is a focus of the capital of the United States until we ended up in Washington, D.C. It went through several cities, just so many cities, and it kept going back to Philadelphia, then another city, then back to Philadelphia, then a few more cities, then back to Philadelphia, until it finally is Washington, D.C. But no surprise that it ended up in Philadelphia. 55 delegates gathered together then. The oldest delegate was Benjamin Franklin, 80 years old. Some of them were under 30. Some of them were in their 20s. But the oldest was Benjamin Franklin, and he was 80 years old. James Wilson and Governor Morris helped to create the final draft of the Constitution. They were kind of the polishers, the ones who just made sure that everything made sense, everything flowed. But James Madison is really the one who came up with a basic plan, and so he's called the father of the Constitution because of that. That's just a little trivia fact, but something that might be on the test. I might say, who are these? Who's the father of the Constitution? And I would expect you to know that it is Madison there. So definitely know that. Okay. Sorry, I had to plug in my computer. It was about to die. Okay, the Constitutional Convention. George Washington was chosen to lead these meetings of the Constitutional Convention. Obviously, he's a leader. He's a very well-respected leader. As a matter of fact, it was because George Washington was there that they really listened to some of these other guys, because Washington was like saying, listen, guys, this is really serious. And they were like, oh, hey, guys, Washington said it's serious. We really need to pay attention, because they respected him so much. His voice carried a lot of weight. It was decided that all states would have one vote. There's 13 states at this time, if you remember. Not a lot, just 13. But every state had one vote. And this is going to come back. It's going to come back. We're going to talk about this again. All meetings were closed to the public. So, they closed the windows, they closed the doors, they locked the door. They didn't want the public being a part of this, because they didn't want to cause more social unrest or have the media in there causing problems. They wanted to have people have their right to speak freely and not be judged by everyone. But now, think about today, we have social media, and we have CNN and MSNBC and C-SPAN, and everything you say is on record for all to see and to replay. And if you're really unlucky, you'll become a meme that people will make fun of for years and years and years to come. Or you'll be blasted all over Twitter and Instagram and whatever. But they did appreciate the fact that even at that time, they wanted to keep the media and the public out so that they could really express their opinions freely. All right. So the question is this: how do people get represented? What is fair? I'm not a big fan of the word fair in an argument, because it's a silly word to use. Most people, when they say, and even kids, teenagers, I've said this for years. When teenagers say, "Well, that's not fair," what they're really saying is, "I didn't get my way," and it's really a way of throwing a temper tantrum more than anything, because you're not asking for fair, you're asking for privileges. When people say, "Well, that's not fair," what you're saying is, I didn't get treated special and I wanted to. If you get grounded because you didn't clean your room, that's not fair. Well, it's not fair that I have somebody living in my house that doesn't clean their room. But, but you're not asking that. You wanted a special permission to leave your room clean or unclean or whatever, messy. And you're saying to your mom and dad, hey, that's not fair. What you're saying is, I didn't get what I want. Something happened that I didn't like, and so I'm going to say that's not fair. Well, that doesn't make sense. And in this case, it's no different when they say fair. we want to make it fair. What they're really saying is we want our state to have a bigger voice than anybody else. So I don't know how that's fair, but anyway, it all depends on how you arrange the rules. But how are they going to get the representation? They fought for representation in the revolution. That's what they wanted, right? No taxation without representation. Well, how are they going to make that happen? What's a fair way to do that? The Virginia Plan. Edmund Randolph proposed something called the Virginia Plan, written mostly by James Madison. Again, here comes that word, that name, James Madison, coming in, the father of the Constitution. Well, he's writing something called the Virginia Plan. Well, what is that? Quite simply, the plan said there's going to be a bicameral legislature, so two houses or two chambers in the Congress that they create. He said we should have a chief executive chosen by Congress. So his plan originally was saying Congress needs to choose who's going to be like the president. People don't need to be involved in any of that. There needs to be a court system, and he said that the Congress had to have the power to tax. So let's fix this now. That's part of my plan. Also, the voters were going to elect the representatives to the lower house, much like what we have today. But he said, you know what, the lower house really needs to be the one to elect the upper house. We don't need voters getting involved in that. So voters having some voice, not all the voice. Now, bigger states got more representatives according to this plan, and that's the earmark, and really why it's called the Virginia Plan, because Virginia is a big state, so this plan gave bigger states more representatives. So the bigger states with more population, they got more voice in Congress. Smaller states would never get their way. Isn't that the way it is at home? The older one always gets their way, the younger one doesn't, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the younger one always gets their way. I don't know. So the New Jersey Plan. June 15th, 1787, you have William Patterson introducing something called the New Jersey Plan. The plan is simple. He says, no, you're wrong. We don't need it based on the population and the size. Little states need to get equal say. So he said, we need one chamber in Congress, unicameral, and each state needs to have one vote, okay? Equal votes. It doesn't matter how big or little, everybody gets one vote. I don't understand the problem with that. And so Roger Sherman comes to the rescue with a great compromise, and he says, we need to have a bicameral legislature. Let's do that. Let's compromise a little bit. We will have a bicameral legislature. The upper house will have 2 members for each state. So every state is equal no matter the size. But the lower house will be based on population, and then they both need to agree. That's the compromise. They all thought it was a good idea. Well, most of the people thought it was a good idea. And they went about their business. But it brings up a point, because if you have any of the houses, any of Congress, based on population, then what is a population? Who's counted in the population? Do slaves get counted in the population? Do you count slaves? Are they people? Are they not people? How do you figure slaves into this? And so, people said, yes, they do. No, they don't. Well, obviously, the southern states, they want to get more representation in Congress. They want to be able to get their way. So they're going to say, yes, we need to count slaves. Well, this meant slave states would have an advantage over the states without slaves. And it became a big controversy. Again, a compromise comes to the table, and here's the compromise. Well, let's just make every 5 slaves would count as 3 slaves, as 3 people. So basically, each slave only counted as 3/5 of a person. Makes sense, right? But how can you have a person only counting as 3/5 of a person? That's just the silliest thing I've ever heard. Actually made it into the Constitution. It was kind of crazy. Okay, so there was a big debate over whether or not there would be a Bill of Rights. It did not get passed before the Constitution got passed without a Bill of Rights. Back and forth, back and forth. They ended up adding it years after the Constitution was ratified. So initially there was not a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. And on September 17th, 1787, the delegates assembled to sign the 4-page document that we know as the Constitution of the United States of America. 3 delegates did not sign. Massachusetts had 1 delegate and Virginia had 2 delegates. 2 of those delegates, one for Massachusetts, one for Virginia, was because of the Bill of Rights. The other one just because he didn't get his way. The drafters of the Constitution decided that it would go into effect if 9 out of 13 states approved it. Even though the Articles of Confederation said you needed 13 states to approve this, they said, we're ignoring that because we're trashing it anyway, and we're making a new rule. So a little controversial, but it worked. Okay, that's the end of the section. There is a video. We're not going to take the time now to watch it, but watch it. The notes have the link. Go ahead and watch it, and we'll go ahead and move past that. So here is the assignment. I will post this and send it out via Remind. Basically, it's a Venn diagram that you'll need to complete. If you have any questions, please send me a message or see me after school or sometime between school. But that's it. That's the lesson. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned a lot. We'll continue to talk about this. Thanks for watching.